All right, you ready? All right, it's 6 o'clock p.m., February the 6th, 2024. I hereby call the meeting of the City of Montgomery Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Is there any citizens that like to speak or discuss or have anything?
We've got the applicants here for items 2 through 5.
Okay. And if we could, David, if we could move 4 and 5 up to after number 2.
Yes, sir.
That way we get all the signage out of the way. That way they don't have to sit through all this riveting, planning.
Sure.
So, item number 1, consideration and possible action on the January 2nd, 2024 regular meeting minutes.
I make a motion to approve the January 2nd, 2024 regular meeting.
I second the motion.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Item 1 has passed. Item number 2, consideration and possible action on the wall sign for Bar and Vines located at 401 College Street, Suite 150 in the Historical Preservation District.
Members of the commission, you have in the agenda report the sign application as well as a picture of the sign on the wall. You see that this is the same size as the Bar and Vine, or I'm sorry, as the HP Bistro, and it's related to a name change from one to the other. Again, the applicant, Mr. Harold Vines, is here if you have any questions for him.
Is the establishment changing in any way other than just the name?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Still does the same thing,
Just-
same
Same
permits.
LLC, you just change the DBA and change the logo.
Is that light sign lit from behind?
No.
It's just, how does it illuminate? Or how do you?
Signs on the covered balcony above it.
Okay.
So basically, it was the same as
I usually use
Same
that
as
sign.
4, it's just
Okay.
different color. Yeah, okay.
I just couldn't tell on that picture. I was like, is he illuminating it from the behind? From behind?
That's the original
Okay.
sign where you're at.
I make a motion to approve the wall sign for Bar and Vines located at 401 College Street, Suite 150 in the Historic Preservation District.
I second motion.
I have a motion and a second to approve the wall sign at Bar and Vines located at 401 College Street, Suite 150. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, number 2 passes. Dave, I'd like to move 4 and 5 up next.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so item number 4 is consideration and possible action on the freestanding sign for 504 Caroline Street located in the Historical Preservation District.
Members of the commission, again, you have the information in your packet. I'll draw your attention to the survey, which is on page 18 of your packet, that with the red X in the circle, if you're familiar, is the southeast corner, which is where they plan on locating the sign. And then on page 20, you see the graphic of what the sign would look like. And again, the applicants here, if you have any specific questions for them.
When you call it freestanding, are you talking about it's on a base that can be moved by wind, or what do you mean by freestanding?
Freestanding just means it's not attached to anything.
All right, okay. Is it lit? Electricity go to it?
I don't believe so.
Does that matter if it has electricity going to it or not, right there on the corner?
I don't see how you would electrify this particular sign. If there were landscape lighting or something, again, historically, we've just not, delved into, regulating, a landscape.
I was just wondering.
A ground light. If there was something that would cause a glare or something, the city does have the ability to address that. But as part of the actual sign itself, I'm not aware of any electricity.
Does it stay within the perimeter of your boundaries of your property, or does it go over it?
I believe it's inside the room.
Affirm that the only way we would issue a sign permit is that it has to be wholly on private property.
Okay.
applicants as well, we're going to require them to hand dig. There are not any utilities on this property with regard to city public water line, city public sewer line. However, they are in the right of way adjacent to this. You know, given that they're 5-6 feet away from them, it would still be prudent just to hand dig those or to approve it on the condition that they hand dig. That's on a sign permit. You guys don't have to worry about that. You can if you want, but that's going to be more of a condition of the issuance of the permit.
Okay.
And the colors are kind of what's on your picture here?
Yes,
Like a gray or a green and white?
yes, sir.
Okay.
Are they permanent signs, or do they have to be refinished and redone as the years go by with the wear and tear, the wind and the weather?
I'm not sure, but I know Mr. Cox is pretty adamant about things staying nice looking, so if it shows any wear and tear, I don't think it'd be an issue to get it redone.
You don't have there's not a technical standard that's in our ordinance that, requires a certain, mineral thickness, a certain, UV rating that we've got to be able to control that.
I move to approve the freestanding sign for 504 Carolina Street located in the Historic Preservation District.
I second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for the approval of the freestanding sign at 504 Caroline Street, located in the Historical Preservation District. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Item number 4 passes. Item number 5, consideration and possible action on the wall sign at 504 Caroline Street, located in the Historical Preservation District.
On page 22, you see the detail of the sign, the dimensions and specs of the sign, and this one is again, it's a wall sign. And I did want to point out, kind of on page 23 there, when you see the photo where the sign's going to go, it's kind of hard to show it, with the markup of the PDF, but this isn't mounted flat to the wall. It hangs out, perpendicular, similar to what they would call like a shingle style sign, if you've seen or heard of those.
How's it attaching to the wall?
Perpendicular to it.
I know, but how? Metal
Oh,
brackets,
yeah.
screws, nuts,
I
glued?
believe it's going to be, this bracket's going to stick out from the wall, that'll have screws in the wall through the bracket.
Okay. And that material the sign is made out of?
Aluminum.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And that, if other tenants move in to the building, that'll be a similar sign. Probably they all have to use a common sign.
Yes, sir. I believe that would be the case, but I don't think that's in the plans for anybody else.
Okay. Well.
I make a motion we approve the wall sign.
I second.
I have a motion and a second for the approval of the wall sign at 504 Caroline Street, located in the Historical Preservation District. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Item 5 passes. Okay. Now we will move back to item 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Consideration and possible action on the preliminary plat for Hills of Town Creek, Section 5.
Good evening, everyone. What is before you is Section 5 of the Hills of Town Creek subdivision, which I believe we're all familiar with. So this is the last remaining subdivision. What is before you is their preliminary plat. So there's a couple of things that I'd like to point out on here. So first thing is that with the platting of this section, this will complete MSWay out to Lone Star Parkway. That's the intent of Section 5 and always has been from the very beginning. Section 5 consists of 73 lots. They are going to be similar in size to the existing sections 1 through 4. We review the preliminary plat, so just to walk you through our process. When we get one of these, we review it in accordance with the criteria that we're given, being City of Montgomery's code of ordinances, as well as any previously approved variances that apply to the property. In the case of Section 5, they were given 4 variances, one for minimum lot width to allow them to go down to a 50-foot lot width, a minimum lot depth to allow them to go down to 100 foot, a minimum lot area of 5,500 square feet, with a side yard setback of 5 feet. These variances were previously approved in December of 2021, and so that is the criteria that we reviewed against. The street widths, the entrance lane is a 60-foot right-of-way, and then with a 28-foot pavement width, and then the remaining internal streets are 50-foot right-of-way with a 28-foot pavement width, and that is in accordance with the code ordinances.
And those are the ones that have the smooth curve, right?
Correct, they'll have a rollover curve, just like sections 2 and 4.
This is the last section.
That's correct, this is the final section.
Now, you said that the streets were 28 feet,
28-foot pavement, yes.
and you said in accordance with what?
The city's code of ordinances. So these are considered minor residential streets, since each street going through the internal, kind of that triangle shape, if you will, they each serve less than 50 lots, and so they classify as a minor residential street. So that allows them to do a 50-foot right-of-way with a 28-foot pavement width. The entrance road, I believe it's called Theodore Lane, counts as a residential street, different from a minor residential. Only difference being it's a 60-foot right-of-way with a 28-foot pavement width, because that entrance road serves more than 50 lots.
And that's the one coming off the Lone Star?
That's going to be the one coming off of Emma's Way.
Emma's Way, okay.
There's no connection to Lone Star Park.
All right.
So again, this is the preliminary plat. This is the first step before we begin reviewing construction plans. By approving the preliminary plat, this does not immediately subdivide the property. It just allows the next step in the planning process to continue.
I make a motion to pass the action on the preliminary plat for Hills of Town Creek, Section 5.
I second it.
I have a motion and a second. To pass on to the city council or to approve?
A preliminary plat does not need approval of city
Okay.
council.
I have a motion and a second to approve the preliminary plat for the Hills of Town Creek, Section 5. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No. All in,
I vote no.
okay. So we have 1, 2, 3 ayes and 1 no. Note that. Item number 3 passes.
Because this was all a planned community, is the reason we're, as we build each section of that community, we then get drug into more or less going along with from one section to the next section to all those things were approved or variances that were approved in the first section or third section. Is that the way I read this?
Not with this development. With this development, each section, the variances were granted individually. With other developments, they have been granted at the beginning as part of a development agreement. That's not how, that was not the process with Hills of Town Creek. They did a variance request for sections 2 and 3, a separate one for section 4, and then section 5 was originally active in 2021 when the variances were originally presented. The section went on hold for a couple of years and has now come back.
I don't think that, I'm not sure about the rest of this panel, but I'm not clear on the plat approval process from start to end. And I think it's very important that we understand where we are in that line of approval and how we're getting there. And it just looks to me like we have just a rush on these 55-foot lots, and it's got, somewhere it's got to stop.
I understand. Would you like me to walk you all through the plat process just to...
Yes,
Yes.
sure.
So at the beginning of development, before it's kind of at its inception, from the very beginning, We have a development meeting with the developer and their engineer typically to discuss what is their plan for the project. Very preliminary, and we go over what kind of requirements are you going to need. Are they proposing anything outside of what the code requires that would therefore require a variance request? The first step then is preliminary plating. If any variance requests are needed, those come before the preliminary plat, so that by the time we're reviewing the plat, we already know the criteria that we are reviewing against. If that variance isn't granted before the preliminary plat, I'm only allowed to review against the code of ordinances. So the variances come first, and then a preliminary plat. Once the preliminary plat is approved, which only comes to y'all, to this panel, then we can start reviewing construction plans. And then at the same time, there's a couple of options for plating. We review construction plans, and we can either review the final plat at the same time, or we can review the final plat at the end of construction. There's a couple of ways that that can be done. And so the final plat is the one that ultimately gets recorded with the county. It subdivides the property, it provides the legal property boundaries for every lot, any reserves, everything like that. And that will come before you, and the final plat goes to city council.
So if they're asked variances for the narrow or smaller lots, that comes to us prior, correct?
It doesn't come to you.
It doesn't.
The variances go to the Board of Adjustment, which is in this case the City Council.
So the city council makes that variance decision.
Make that call.
Then,
Your job in approving plats, preliminary plats or final plats, is what the courts have defined as a ministerial function. You don't have a lot of discretion. Your only function is to look at the plat document that is submitted and whether or not it meets all of the code requirements for those plat documents. There's a list in the code of what they have to have on there in terms of even the scale of the plat, the boundary lines, the identification markers, the easements, that sort of thing. If it contains all of those and if it meets all of your zoning code requirements, then you are actually required to approve the plat.
okay.
In this case, it doesn't meet the zoning code requirements as they normally are, but they got variances ahead of time granted to the city council. And so those apply instead of your normal zoning code requirements. So it's a situation where if they've complied with those requirements, you're essentially required to approve it.
So, asking the question of, so the lot size that is in our ordinances right now is the lot size that we're stuck with right now until things change. Or a developer wants to come in and make bigger lots.
The lot size in our ordinance is 75 feet.
Right.
At the city council,
I understand that, but you're saying the lot size.
Right.
The ordinance lot size is
Right,
75
but the
feet.
city council makes that decision if they want to go down. Right.
So I think where that leaves us is that we have other action by council to allow variances, and when we see it, we don't know if there is any invariance involved in the approval process. We don't see that, in other words, we're not seeing the variance. The only thing we can say is look at this plat and say, well, I guess it's on paper, it looks good to me. So there's no way for us to know incrementally how it went through each one of those steps, how the variance got there. I think what it sounds to me, and I don't want to lead way in, I don't want to sound negative about it, but it sounds like we start a bunch of negotiation way up front when you start the an initial history or study of the possibility of using the property as a development with certain size lots. It looks like we start negotiating all of that away right away. I think it should be a more rigid requirement. That's just me.
One of the things that we've kind of changed on in the past couple of years with at the staff level. So the Board of Adjustment, the small portion of the code that speaks to the job of the Board of Adjustment says that they can get the opinion of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So whereas, say with the rezoning, the P&Z is required to give a recommendation, it's optional on something like a lot size variance. We started bringing those to you guys, for a recommendation before it goes to the council, because, the council's naturally going to ask, what does the P&Z think about this? And so this one is a little bit different, again, given that they were granted in December of 21. So there's a lot of water under the bridge between, then and now.
So what is the process going forward? Are we going to have an opportunity as the Planning and Zoning Commission to see these requests for variances before they're approved by the Board of Adjustment?
Right, in two fashions. So in addition, just to proactively come to P&Z for a recommendation before it goes to the Board of Adjustment, one other change that we've made is during the feasibility study. You guys will recall that have been on P&Z for a while now. You see these, the feasibility studies. So because, so we had seen a very similar thing where there's a lot of conversations and a lot of work that goes on, and then the P&Z gets involved, but they feel like they're involved way after the fact. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to bring those feasibility reports and go over them with y'all as well, so y'all know that the project, again, it may be a number of months before you see any action on it, but you understand it's on the horizon.
We did bring up, though, when this, the Hills of John Creek first started coming to us, we did bring up that it was 75, reducing it down to 45. We agreed to 55. I mean, there was some back and forth in different neighborhoods and in this one as well. But we did make our recommendation, but it was approved and passed by City Council.
At 50 feet?
But it began the conversation where we're at now, where they bring us the feasibility and they will bring us our recommendation to take it to City Council. Like what we got tonight, that already happened in 2021, so we're just now seeing it 3 years later. But we will in the future for future
Anything
neighborhoods.
new, hopefully we'll be involved.
What would it take to change the ordinance itself? If a 75-foot lot is just not feasible, why don't we find some middle ground? If it's 60 or 65 or whatever it is, when you take that, the volume, the size of these houses may look good on a lot if they're not crammed together 5 foot apart or 5 foot side yard easements. So I think there should be some redesign by the city to look at changing those ordinances so we're not giving variances on everything we do because everybody wants another product.
Right.
So
that's a long answer, but it's in really two parts. So one, the planning update that Gary had given us an overview of that we're currently working on. They're going to look at, kind of every nut and bolt involved in the zoning code, as well as a lot of the other, development related. So the subdivision ordinance, which is what we're here, tonight, addressing. The second piece of that, are there items that we can basically package into an interim, update that are kind of the low-hanging fruit, if you will, to be able to say, okay, we know we're updating this zoning code and all of our development regulations, but that's going to take a really long time. There's some stuff that we can put in place, early on in the process, so we don't have to wait another 12 months before we have a new lot size. When you get into lot size, to me, it's a deceivingly simple thing to wrestle with because you think, well, I'm just talking about one number, I'm just talking about the lot width, but there's a whole lot that goes into that. In terms of the economics of development, not on the developer's end, but on our end, on what does it cost to maintain, what is, for the linear foot of street, what is that Warren tax? So there's a lot of considerations that, that come down to it, but certainly if it's something that, that y'all on the council feel strongly about, amending, sooner than the full update of our development regulations. And it's something that we could put on the list and talk to the consultants once we've got a contract in place to see if it's a viable, thing to change.
And that's the multi-code that Gary's working on now to change things. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Move on to item number 6, review and discussion regarding the land use assumptions map to be used in the impact fee updates.
Thank you.
All right, this next item, I'm going to ask you to take off your P and Z hat and put on your CIAC hat for this step. So we talked about this a little bit last month. I gave you a little preview of impact fees and what that means for the city. What is in front of you is the next step in the impact fee process. This is called the land use assumptions map. And if it looks familiar, it's because it is based on your city zoning map. So that is what Zach has just passed out to you. So that's the first sheet, that's the map. What's behind that is our water and sewer projections. Don't get too hung up on that. I'm going to walk y'all through what you're looking at just so you have an idea of what we're asking you to consider tonight. So the next step in the impact fee process is for the CIAC to review land use assumptions. And what that means is you are essentially, since the impact fees are based on the cost of the capital projects needed to serve the city and its anticipated growth in the next 10 years, the other part of that is the anticipated growth in the next 10 years and how many connections are we expecting to come in. In order for us to calculate that, we have to make some assumptions on what's going to go on the undeveloped pieces of property. And so what the law allows us to do is use the zoning map as a guide because it's an official adopted city map, which is what we've done. So in front of you is the overlays that you're seeing outline the undeveloped areas. Anything that does not have kind of an overlay hatch on it either is already existing, is currently in design, and so we already have a very solid idea of what's going there, it's accounted for separately, or it's floodplain and it's undevelopable land. And so it's not included in our assumptions for land use because it's unusable, essentially. This is then taken to the next step, which is creating water and sewer projections. Now, behind the map, you will find our projections, and this is, it's a large spreadsheet, so to give you the long and the short of it, we need to look at every development in the city, single family, commercial, institutional. We don't currently have any industrial, so that's part of what we consider as projected, as well as what is in feasibility, what is potentially coming, what do we know. We've heard murmurs about, for example, Hills of Town Creek Section 5. We knew it was coming, it just kind of was dormant for a little bit. And so we take that and we have for what's existing, we base it on actual usage. We've got meter data. We look at over the past 12 months again, average daily use. So a 12-month average takes out any kind of peaks from the summer from irrigation, and it also equalizes with the low usage that we typically see in the winter. We take that average current usage and apply it to future developments that are coming. Hand in hand with that, when a developer comes in and says that they're going to use, for example, 50,000 gallons per day of water, using round numbers, that's the number that we apply as well for our projected usage. Our build-out, as we're looking to the future, the speed of the building out, number of connections that we're expecting per year, is based off of a couple of factors. One is if a developer tells us we're planning on building about 60 to 90 homes per year, that gives us a very clear idea for what to expect for the future. Otherwise, we look at trends in the city, about how many connections are going in, single-family connections, commercial connections, and make an educated prediction from there. Now, I say prediction because, of course, nobody knows what the future holds, but we do base all of these projections off of existing to the best of our knowledge. So what is before you and what is being asked of you is to look mostly at the map. This is land use assumptions map. And see, this is the time for you to give feedback on the assumptions that are made, because those assumptions ultimately, like I said, drive the impact fees. This drives the number of connections you're expecting to come in the future. So if you see an area that is currently zoned as residential, and y'all would like to change the land use assumption to something different, now is the time to bring that up.
We only have tonight?
So you can look at tonight, but talk about it again next month, which is why it was put in your packet ahead of time.
Okay.
But
I looked at it and I was like, holy Moses.
I understand. So we can discuss this again next month as well. And so you don't have to make a final decision of, this looks great. Now, if you want to tell me that everything we put together is perfect, I'd love to hear that. But I understand if y'all would like another month to take a look at it and think about it. But again, this is all based on the zoning map. Your zoning does not currently have, one thing to point out is there's not currently a separate zone for example, high-density residential versus low-density residential. So when we made these assumptions, everything is assuming that it follows your code ordinances with a 75-foot lot. Again, going back to, that's the only criteria that we can consider. We can't necessarily anticipate for a variance coming when your code doesn't allow us to look at high versus low density. So when we're looking at usages, especially getting into the projections, for what a typical single-family home uses, we look at, like I said, historical meter data. Now, the state has a standard for what they think a typical single-family home uses, and I will admit their standard is very high. They expect a typical single-family home to use 360 gallons per day. What we typically see in the city is about 200 to 225. So to be conservative but not dangerously so, we use 225 gallons per day for a single-family connection. Especially with the smaller homes and the smaller lots, irrigation is a lot less. Sometimes those daily averages will dip below 200, but again, we try to be conservative without being dangerously so. When we look at commercial usage, it's kind of hard to know what is going to go into commercial. It could be a retail that has a single bathroom and very low usage. It could be a restaurant that has very high usage. So to try to equalize that, we use kind of a middle ground average. We have a way of converting commercial usage to get it down to an expected connection, if you will, to try to equate it to single-family connections to find that kind of point of equilibrium to make projections make sense. This is industry standard is they call it an equivalent single-family connection. So, for example, a Panda Express, how many homes of usage is a Panda Express going to use? It gives us the same metric across all types of development. So that's what you'll see when you're looking at this. That equivalent single-family connection then becomes part of the impact fee calculation.
What's the significance of the yellow dots on the planned development? You've got some that have yellow dots and some that don't.
That's a great question. So the ones that do not have yellow dots are known developments. So for example, where the MISD, the CTE, and the Ag Barn is going right next to Town Creek Crossing, we know that that's going to be institutional. Their plans are just about approved. And so we know what that usage is going to be. The portion of it that has horizontal stripes, that we know that is going to be residential. It's been discussed as residential multiple times, and it's currently about to enter feasibility for another residential development. Getting to your question, the ones with the yellow dots, so the city's zone for planned development allows for mixed use. So what that essentially means is we don't know what that's going to be. It could be commercial, it could be single family, and while we can make an educated guess on what that would be, for example, along Pleasant Morgan will likely be commercial, realistically.
Along where?
Along Pleasant Morgan,
Oh, okay.
that will likely be commercial. But because of the way the zoning code is, since we don't have any active developments, any reason, any concrete reason to assume that, we can't. So we assume planned development gives us a little bit more wiggle room. Over on kind of the right side of that teal area, those could be commercial, they could be single families, so we kind of, when we're building those projections, we do make more of a kind of educated prediction, but it's all based on the same criteria for usage. When it comes to how many acres is it, how much water do we expect it to use for commercial or single family, and go from there.
So that section that's northeast of the intersection of Buffalo Springs and Lone Star Parkway, going up toward the
Wood Creek,
across from Town Creek Crossing. That, what is that yellow dot's going to be there? Is that mixed use, you said?
that's mixed use. We've seen ideas for commercial to go there, we've seen ideas for residential to go there. And right now, there's no concrete movement on that property. That's one option for you as the CIAC to say, we would like to assume that that corner tract is going to be residential. We'd like to assume that the one to the south is going to be residential. This is where the CIAC can provide direction on that.
How do we define the floodplain area in this map?
So if it's within the boundaries of a tract that's partially usable, we didn't necessarily completely eliminate it. There's ways to work around it. But one that I want to point out to you that specifically got removed from it is next to where that CTE building is going. There's a kind of blank space. You've got the MISD CTE and a blank teal area and then some yellow dots.
Right.
That blank yellow area was platted with Town Creek Crossing Section 1 as a drainage reserve, and it's almost entirely floodplain and floodway. So that area, not only is it not developable by floodplain, it was also platted as a drainage reserve, so nothing will go there.
So what we need to do by the next meeting is look at this and come up with ideas on maybe the best use of different areas versus what they are marked.
Right, so if there's any changes in assumptions that you'd like to see, that would be the time to bring it up. Specifically, I would draw attention to that planned development area. We'd like to assume that this is commercial. We'd like to assume that this is residential. Other than that, we do typically follow the zoning map for our assumptions.
What do you think I don't know, John, and the future of the city? Are we looking at more residential, or are we looking at more commercial, industrial? I mean, I guess that's the first thing, we need to look at is which direction do we want to go?
Right, so the word caution against making too many changes. The intent of this is not a future land use map.
Right.
So it's, with impact fees, you can do updates as often as you like. So the piece of land that we thought was going to be residential changes. Somebody requests a rezone and it's commercial and it ends up being a much different usage than we expected. We can do an update to the impact fees. So what you're deciding on, while yes, it's going to affect this current update, you're not locked in place for the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah, I have two questions. With the different areas, how do the impact fees relate to those areas, like industrial, for instance? And the second question is, what are the impact fees used for?
Very good question. So the first one, impact fees are applied the same across the city. So we don't have an industrial impact fee and a
Okay.
residential impact fee. The way that they're calculated is based on the size of your water meter. And so since everything is based on the standard of a single-family home, the single-family house will pay a certain rate. They have a 5/8 inch meter, for example. There's a multiplier in the capacity of that meter as we go to larger meters. And that multiplier is applied to the impact fee. So somebody who's, for example, getting a 6-inch meter, their impact fee will be that multiplier larger than a 5/8 inch meter because the demand on the system is that multiplier larger, has the opportunity to be that multiplier larger. We look at maximum flow available to go through that size of meter to get that multiplier. So while it changes based on your meter size, it's applied uniformly across the city. So commercial development on the east side with a 2-inch meter pays the same as a commercial development on the west side with a 2-inch meter.
Okay, so the impact fees, the dollars,
Yes.
do they go in a fund for future maintenance and expansion?
They go into, so the law requires that impact fees collected go to a separate impact fee fund. The only thing that those funds are allowed to be spent on are projects that are on the impact fee list. So remember, there's two parts of calculating this fee is the capital cost for the projects themselves to serve the additional demand, and then the additional demand itself. So the only thing impact fees are allowed to be spent on are those projects that give us the capital cost. So a couple of examples would be a water plant expansion, a sewer plant expansion. There's a large diameter water line that would need to go along Lone Star Parkway to close a loop, things like that. Impact fees cannot be applied to maintenance of existing facilities. It can only be applied to expansion.
Okay. So if the impact fees are the same regardless of land use, what are we looking at as far as assumptions? Is it assumptions math? But the impact fees, no matter where I look on the map, are the same, right? Or
So essentially what...
based on the meter
Right, so
usage, okay.
yeah, so essentially the difference that it makes is the impact fee, if we're looking at a fraction, your numerator is your capital cost. We're gonna have $15 million in expected water system improvements. I'm using round numbers. So that would go in the numerator. What you're changing is the denominator. And so if we're assuming that property is going to be commercial, that's going to have a different assumed number of connections, but the different demand on the system than if that 100-acre tract becomes homes. The draw on the system, the demand is different. And so what that then changes is what is the impact fee per connection. It's still going to be uniformly applied, but what that number is will change because the land use changed.
Okay, so then when say, let's look on industry. If industry moves in and at the time of construction, everything says I need this much water. What happens 3 years later when they have to double that amount? Do they have a new impact fee?
They don't, so their impact fee is based on the size of meter that goes in.
Right.
The size of meter is determined by how much flow they're going to use. So this all goes back to the beginning of the development process. Industry comes in, they say we are expecting to use 30,000 gallons per day, and we're going to need a 3-inch meter to do this. They will pay impact fees on a 3-inch meter. If all of a sudden that industry that said they were going to use 30,000, they start using 100,000 gallons per day, we start having a conversation with them. Why are you using so much more? What changed? If you're building more, we would see the plans for that. If their usage is going up that much, that meter might not be large enough. So if they end up getting a larger meter, then they would pay a different impact fee. Or if they get a second meter with a second tap, then they'll pay an impact fee for that. for that second tap.
Okay, so
Okay.
they have to add meters, they pay impact fees for,
If they're adding a tap to
Yes.
to the system, they
Right.
pay another impact fee.
okay.
I was just looking to see if there's a way that they might try to beat the system.
Right, yeah, and that's something that we've kept an eye on, especially with the car washes.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
You know, when we review the plans, if they've got a recirculation system, and then once they're in service, are they using it? Are they not using it? We can tell that based on their water usage, and then if they were supposed to be using their recirc system and they're not, then we go out and have a conversation with them.
so that's covered by the monthly bill for water and sewer. Thank you.
And part of it is also that you update this periodically. In fact, the statute requires it to be done every 5 years because, you know, we're making a best guess at this point in time for the next 5-year period. And, you know, as we know with the economy and real estate, you know, things that we think will happen don't always happen. So you come back and revisit it, you know, a few years down the line, and you make adjustments. And that's actually what this whole process is. We're adjusting from, you know, the impact fees that were established, you know, 5 years ago. It's constantly being reviewed and updated, you know, over time.
So how far off are we from 5 years ago on what we should be?
Where we expect it to be today. We are lower than we were 5 years ago. Our daily usage is lower than what we thought it would be. What we've changed since then is how much we were assuming each home or equivalent connection uses. 5 years ago, that assumption was what the state mandates, which is 360 gallons per day. That's the TCEQ standard, if you will. Now we're basing it on actual flows. And the biggest reason is not wanting to overbuild
Right.
and expand facilities prematurely, and then they don't get fully utilized. So we're trying to time, we want to expand at the right time, but not cut the city too close to where they're running slim on capacity, but also not overbuild to where you've got a wastewater plant running at 20% capacity. There's efficiencies to both sides.
Just so I have a feel for, what are we talking about dollars-wise per meter size?
So currently, the 5/8 inch meter, kind of your baseline, it's a two-part, so water and sewer impact fee.
Right,
Combined, it's about $3,800 per connection,
okay.
per home. And then it increases from there according to that multiplier.
So that at the time of construction, the developer pays that and it's wrapped into the price of the house,
So the way that,
basically?
essentially, yes, that's typically how it is. So impact fees are assessed at the time of platting.
Okay,
They are due at the time of connection. So platting early, the developer can lock in their impact fees in case there's an update, anything like that. It locks it in at that point. They don't have to pay until they physically connect to the system. So when they reach out to Public Works for a tap fee, then, here's your impact fee.
so all these developments that were approved years ago, they got a lower price impact fee than the new developer?
This is actually the first update to the impact fees that have been done since they went into effect. The impact fees are relatively new to the city within
Okay.
the last 5 or so years. And so the only way that developers have gotten out of impact fees is if they platted before the effective date of the impact fees. If that final plat was recorded, then they pay just your regular tap fee, which is cost plus 3%, or how the ordinance states it. So if you plat after that implementation timeline, you're subject to impact fees.
So is that $3,800 per household? Is that high or low what we're looking at now?
You will see a small increase.
Small
I don't
increase.
know exactly what that number is yet because we need to finish up the land use assumptions so that we can finish up what that final fee per connection is going to be.
And that'd be the same thing for commercial and industrial. It's probably a little light at this point.
Yeah, there will be an increase to all of the meter sizes. Like I said, I'm not expecting a large increase by any means.
Right.
But once we get these locked down, we'll be able to lock in that number.
What we talked about the project list, and is it, where in the process do we look at that?
So it's the next step. So after land use assumptions are approved, and y'all have no other comments, we will bring the full packet to you guys to present, and that's, we'll walk you through what projects are we including, what's the expected cost of it, so we can include construction fees, engineering fees, everything that goes into it. That comes next. So if y'all want to talk about this again at your March meeting, we can. At that point, after this is set in place, then the next meeting, we'll bring the impact fee packet to you guys. If y'all are not thinking that you'll have any substantial changes, we can go ahead and bring a final draft of that to your next meeting, so you can we can walk you through the project list at your next meeting, so you can get an idea of it, and then we just wouldn't have that final number until all your April meeting.
I'd like to look at the assumptions in more detail before so
Absolutely.
we can discuss it next meeting.
Yes, absolutely. We'll bring that next meeting. What water projects are we looking at? What sewer projects are we looking at? How do we get the numbers that we're talking about?
Okay.
If you guys have any questions, throughout the month, feel free to share them with me, and I'll, make sure that the link is made between y'all and the engineers.
Okay.
I see a lot of lists of different things that are on here, but I have not seen Home Depot.
Do you see the site there on that?
I don't see the name on the spreadsheet. I see Lupi Tortilla, but I don't see where, is it on here? Am I looking at it correctly? I'm trying to find it because it should be,
It's just the block there that's commercial.
Yeah.
At the corner of, right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, right there. I mean, that doesn't have the names.
Right, with something like a Home Depot where you just, I think the restaurants are probably the key ones to identify, because again, their water usage is just so high relative to, say, a big box store that may have, 5 toilets for men, 5 for women.
I was just wondering, like I seen everything else, but I was like, I see HEB.
Yeah, it took me a second. It is on here.
Okay, I didn't see it. Go ahead.
If you go to the first page.
Yep. Looked right over it, yeah.
That existing section, so that middle section after the first gray line,
Yes.
kind of in the middle of that. It's titled under Buffalo Springs Shopping Phase 2.
Okay.
J.
All right. Okay.
The reason it's there and not in the future section is because that reserve was already platted back in 2016.
All right.
So we're just waiting for it to be developed.
That's a good example of one where they won't pay an impact fee, but their cost for their cap falls under what the old calculation was the actual cost plus 200% of the cost. So,
Because of when they
because
asked.
when they platted and when that lot, or when the Home Depot, parcel was a legal lot ready to be built on.
Okay. All right.
And they're, kind of, without, having a ton of experience, with looking at these, you don't see a big difference between the cost plus 200%. So several years ago, when we were, really more, dealing with that effective date, and we had some subdivisions that were before, some subdivisions that were after, the cost plus 200% and the impact fee amount were very, very close. So even the impact fee, the biggest difference between, so the cost plus 200%, and when a developer pays that, we can use that on anything in the water sewer system, that needs it. Big difference with these impact fees is, like Catherine mentioned, it's the expansion of the system due in part to that specific development, coming to the city.
It seems like cost plus 200% would be a better system because of the impact fee doesn't take in effect inflation. As far as the cost, when you're doing it over, so for instance, today, the hourly wage for you to do a connection is going to be far different 5 years from now, or 3 years from now. So it's in the middle of 5 years. It seems like the cost plus 200% would be a more equitable and efficient way for the city to do business.
So when we're looking at the cost of these projects, we do look at inflation to try to create, we want to try to make sure that that doesn't happen. We're not losing money to inflation. And so when we're building those costs, we're taking into account what year do we think that this project is going to need to happen. Now, it's less than just a plain two-dimensional list, but we're also saying, okay, in 2025, we're going to need to expand the water plant. But since it's a 10-year look ahead, in 2031, we might need to do another sewer plant expansion. And so the timing of that can make a difference in the pricing.
Yeah, because, for instance, over the last 3 years, nobody anticipated the inflation rate going as fast as it has. So, if we run into that again, you're actually going to be losing on your impact fee versus cost.
And that could be another reason to do a periodic update. Is, inflation prices have gone crazy, we need to update the construction costs. Or development in the city has changed so much, we need to do an update.
Is there a way to tie the inflation rate to periodicity of update?
Maybe not directly, but whenever we're doing an update on these costs, we're rebuilding all of the cost estimates to get these costs. When we build those cost estimates, we base them on actual construction costs that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does take into account inflation. A project that maybe cost $1 million today would have cost $600,000 a few years ago.
Yeah.
Just because of rising construction costs. So that's a good reason to do these updates, is some of the, in this 5-year update that we've done, some of the projects have not changed. Some of them are still the same projects that we thought were going to be needed when we first did these impact fees, and they are still needed. So they're on the list, but the cost of them has changed over time.
So they pay the impact fee real time, not when they bought the property or
When
it's connected, that's when they pay the
Correct.
impact fee. Okay.
The only reason that would not be the case is if it's by separate development agreement.
Okay.
Oh, you do agree to the impact fees within the development agreement?
So, a couple of tangible examples of this. Montgomery Bend, for example, and Redbird Meadows, both developments had some capital expenses that had to be done to serve their property. Some of these expansions had to happen. And so they have a development agreement. Each developer has an agreement with the city that impact fees are assessed and due at the time of plating.
Okay,
So
I
they
got you.
prepay.
Yeah.
They prepay. Otherwise, they wouldn't pay. We would see, $3,800 come in with each single family home. And
Well,
so it's a,
At least you can draw interest on it until it's connected.
right.
Other thoughts or questions? Again, I want to encourage you to reach out, during the month. I'm happy to talk about this stuff, anything that we can answer at the staff level, we'll get to the engineer.
Well, I make a motion to adjourn.
I have a motion,
Second.
have a second. February 6th meeting is adjourned.
Dave, did we ever hear anything about that cemetery off of Old Womack Cemetery Road?